Hi, I'm C4 Burger. This is my first video, and today I'm going to talk about Street Fighter V and some of the problems that people are complaining about, and some of the problems I personally have. So there's kind of like a competitive aspect of the game that's being complained about. There's sort of more of the casual and the story mode that's being complained about. First, we're going to talk about the competitive. Um, my experience with fighting games and Street Fighter in general, Street Fighter really got me interested into fighting games, and I've dabbled in like nearly every fighting game, but usually get too frustrated and quit, but I'll go back to it at some point. The only game I've been able to really get into is Melee. And if you don't want to consider that a fighting game, then don't. It's fine. I enjoy it. That's all that matters. But I've been waiting since Street Fighter V to really be able to get into the Street Fighter series, because Ultra Street Fighter 4, I feel, definitely had some qualities of it that were too difficult. But I'm okay with that because I always like the challenge. But Street Fighter 5, it's easier. There's no doubt about that. And that's good for accessibility and for getting new people into the Street Fighter series. It's a lot more digestible, it's a lot more straightforward, and that's a good thing in that aspect. But there's the negative of removing things like plinks, which, yeah, I don't really want to do plinks myself, but you're removing kind of the higher end level of competitive play. And if you do that, you get a game that's less in-depth, and depth and difficulty in a fighting game is kind of what allows it to continually stay on. It's what allows the meta to grow. It's what enables people to continue playing for plural years, such as like with Melee, because there's been so many new competitive techs discovered, and there's been so many techs that maybe people have known but people haven't really been able to implement until now, like shield dropping, that enables the game's competitive meta to keep evolving and keep things interesting. So, on that note, Street Fighter V, it's not like it's completely devoid of skill. There's plenty of skill. I mean, like, for example, Nash still has some pretty extensive combos, and the timings are tight on them. And I as a noob myself, I have some problems with it. But the game in general, it feels like there's way less options than Ultra Street Fighter 4. And Ultra Street Fighter 4 had an overwhelming amount of options, like to the point where it was just ridiculous. Like, you didn't need that many options for that many situations. It was fun to watch because sometimes it felt like there was just so many different combos, but it's really repulsive for a new player to jump into this game and see so many options. So that's the problem with Ultra Street Fighter 4. A problem with Street Fighter 5 is, honestly, it feels like too few options. So it's more digestible, it's easy to get into, but I already feel like some combos are just repetitive, and I've seen them too many times in the couple of tournaments I've watched, in the gameplay I've done, like such as Kim, for example. There's so much crouching medium punch, back medium punch, heavy punch into heavy you see it so many times already, and it's boring. And I've never been with a Street Fighter game at launch, so maybe this is just what it's like at launch. Maybe we haven't discovered enough things yet, and that's fine. So maybe I'll see what the game turns into. But if I just watch the same combo over and over again for like 2 years, that's going to make me want to play Street Fighter V less, and that's going to make me want to watch the competitive scene significantly less, because one of the best parts of watching a competitive fighting game scene is they're doing all of these things that the average player cannot do, and it's just so incredible to watch. Okay, yeah. So now let's talk about V-Skill. V-Skill is interesting, but my biggest problem with it is either the V-Skill is potentially pointless, like Chun-Li's, or it could have just been a normal move otherwise. It could have just been quarter circle back on some characters, you know, half circle back, just something. It didn't need to be medium punch, medium kick at the same time. And that's the problem I have with it, is that they try to make it this unique across the board function, but it isn't. It's not like focus attack. It's a move. It would be complicated with someone, for example, like Birdie, who has so many variations. I guess maybe it wouldn't work, but that's like the only example I can think of. Specifically with like Vega's, it's almost the same thing as his spinning quarter circle back spinning claw, whatever the hell that is. So I just don't get it. It just seems a little pointless, and it's not an acceptable replacement for focus attack. So, EXFADC. Something I struggle with a lot when I tried to play Ultra Street Fighter 4. Or Street Fighter 4 Arcade Edition, it doesn't matter. And while it was difficult, it enabled so much more depth to the game, because once you were able to learn how to EXFADC, a whole another series of combos open up for you to do to extend your already existing combos. It just made the game so much more complex. Combos became longer, which is not a bad thing. I do not think longer combos are boring. Street Fighter combos, and also Street Fighter 4 specifically, are usually like just the right amount of time, because it's not like you're watching someone get juggled across the screen for a minute like in Mortal Kombat. It's not like that. It doesn't get boring seeing people do long combos in Ultra Street Fighter 4, at least in my experience. I enjoy that. So I think EXFATC was much better. And again, I'm all for the challenge as long as it's not ridiculous, and EXFATC was not ridiculous. I think it was just the right amount of technical ability and skill leading to a payoff and leading to a more in-depth and entertaining game to watch. And I don't think V-Skill replaces that effectively at all. More on that would be with V-Trigger specifically, because V-Triggers replacing Ultras, that's a good thing. That's definitely not bad at all, because most Ultras were just like a go-to generic combo like piece, just a nice finisher, like free damage. And while sometimes that could be cool, that could be interesting, it's just another option to, another variation to the combos that already exist. But making it a power-up is much better, because some characters like Abel, where they would essentially be put in a position of favor when they took a lot of damage because of their Ultra. So many matches with Abel are they lose the beginning of the game, they lose neutral, then they get a couple tornado throws, and then they get that like auto combo into Ultra. And that's not entertaining to watch. That's irritating. It feels like it's punishing your opponent for winning too much. Whereas V-Trigger and V-Skill do a good job of giving someone who's losing the benefit of, like, giving them some sort of help, some sort of aid, so that it's not just destruction. It's not just completely one-sided when somebody gets the lead in the beginning of the game. So that's wonderful. But it also doesn't overdo it like Ultra did. So V-Trigger is good. I like how they did that. I'm glad they got rid of Ultra, because it just makes the game more interesting, and it helps someone who's losing, but it doesn't give them the favor, which is ridiculous. Also, V-Reversal, awesome. That's a good idea. I like that a lot too. Okay, probably what I don't like about the game the most is the roster. And it's a 16-character roster, and that's because the game was released early, so I'm aware of that. I'm okay with that. I was going into this aware the roster was going to be small. I thought they would have added another DLC character by now, because it's been a month, but that's alright. I'll find out. I'll see. After that, we'll get hopefully a steady stream. The roster is super diverse and interesting, and that's a good thing. That's glad. I know a lot of people didn't like how Shoto-centric Ultra Street Fighter 4 was, and this game has a bunch of grapplers, a bunch of semi-grapplers. I guess you could call Karin a Rekka character. You have only 2 Shotos. You have a couple charge characters, Vega not being a charge character. This an interesting roster. Also, on a side note, Vega not being a charge character, I like that so much, because Vega's always just been such an interesting character to me and super cool. And if he's so centered on footsies and spacing and mobility, why you would make him a charge character where that limits his ability to space and that limits his mobility, I've never understood. So making Vega not a charge character is a good thing, and I think some people were scared they're gonna like completely remove charge characters from the game. But as of right now, Fang's fully charged. Nikali has a charge move, or has a couple charge moves. Chun-Li is a charge character, M. Bison a charge character. That's 4 of the 16 of the cast, and there may be more I'm not even thinking of. And then in the upcoming months, we're getting Guile, who's definitely going to be fully charged. Balrog, who maybe won't be, but probably will be. And Urien. So if you're worried that there isn't going to be enough charge characters, that's really not the case. We're about to get a shit ton. Even Alex also, when I looked at his moveset from Third Strike, has 1 or 2 charge moves. I guess that doesn't constitute him as a charge character because he's a grapple character, but if you want to count that, you can. So even though the roster is diverse and interesting, I personally just don't like it. This is not objectively looking at the game. This is my own personal opinion. I like characters like Adon, which I guess you could say Rashid kind of replaces. I like Seth. I always wanted to play Dudley in Ultra Street Fighter 4, but I always found him a little too difficult. I liked Cody too. And I just don't feel like there's anybody like Dudley or like Seth in the roster right now. There's mobile characters, yeah, but there's no one that quite replaces them. And I want to see these characters added, but I know a lot of people specifically don't want Seth because was one of the worst bosses ever. He's just a bad character story arc-wise, but I could care less about his implementation in the story. I just like him as a character. I think he's super entertaining to watch when someone like Punko plays him, and I think it would be great for the competitive scene. He just fits into this faster paced, small damage Street Fighter V way better than I would say any other character, and so Dudley makes sense to me too. So that and the lack of Shotos, I like Shotos. I do, even though the 3 characters I mentioned weren't Shotos. I would love to see more Shotos. I'm totally okay with only having 2 right now, but it just feels like there isn't like that super combo-oriented character other than like Nash. There isn't like a super dynamic character. It just feels a little void right now. It's a 16-character roster. It's tiny, so I understand why that is. I just looked through the roster of Ultra Street Fighter 4, and I could point out like 40 characters in that game, literally, that I would like in this game that aren't right now. And again, I've never been with a Street Fighter launch, so I've never had to like say goodbye to Street Fighter characters I've liked before. But the Ultra Street Fighter 4 roster, I really like. That's maybe one of my favorite rosters of any fighting game. Just overall, there's so many characters. I had a difficult time choosing who I wanted to learn to play because there's so many characters I liked, and I'm not getting that vibe with this game. It's super diverse, super interesting, so that's good for most people because a lot of people were bored with Street Fighter 4's roster, but for me, I don't like it. And that's kind of a negative of the earlier release, but I'm okay with that. I don't regret my purchase. And I'll have to wait and see when the roster gets bigger to see if I still like it. So that's how I feel about the competitive scene and the gameplay function. Let me talk about the casual complaints now. And what that is specifically that the story mode is shit, which it is. It's absolutely it's laughable. It's really bad. But the reason I find those complaints so invalid is Capcom told us. I found articles prior to the launch. Some of them were in January, so that's a little late. But I'm fairly certain they made this clear that they were going to launch the game with a lackluster to shitty story mode. And if they announced it too late and you weren't paying attention and you didn't have enough time to cancel your pre-order, okay, fair enough. You have some reason to complain. But otherwise, I think they made it semi-clear that this was going to be released early so that the competitive people could play the game sooner. And for the most part, everyone seems to be pretty happy about that because you don't have to wait every month now to play it for a week in beta again. So that's way better, and I'm totally okay with fighting games being released early because it enables us to play it earlier without having to wait. And I'm okay with the small roster, even though I don't like it. I'm willing to wait. I'm just happy that I'm able to play the game. I'm happy that I'm able to practice now rather than later. So I don't find that as a negative. So my point with that is, some people are complaining, like, how dare Capcom release a game like this so unfinished? Game companies always try to take advantage of the consumer. They told us about this, and most people were okay with this, and that's why I bought it. That's why everyone else bought it. I'm not disappointed. I don't regret my purchase. Do I think it's a perfect game? No, I have more problems with the gameplay than I do the lack of features. And I am irritated by the lack of King of the Hill lobbies and things like that. That does kind of suck, but again, the game was released early. I'm happy to be playing the game early, even if I am a little annoyed it's lacking some features, which it is. It's not a complete game, but they told us this. It's alright. I do not think that Capcom is going to pave the way for companies to take advantage of consumers. This is not the worst example I can think of at all, obviously. It's really not that bad. And it's definitely not even the worst in the fighting game community. A lot of fighting games, I feel, try to make sure they can have a steady stream of income, and they overdo the DLC. This game isn't. But they're still trying to make sure they can make enough money because the lifespan of a fighting game is variable. A much worse example I can think of is MKX, which released with like a $50 of DLC right off the bat, and then less than a year later they have the XL edition, which is the base game with all that DLC for $60, with the new expansion. Less than a year later, so if you already bought this, you know, you're shit out of luck and you have to buy the XL expansion alone, and without any PC support. So that frustrates me way more than Capcom telling us they're going to release the game unpolished and unfinished so that we can play it sooner, and then following up with it. They're going to follow up with it. They're not going to abandon it. That won't happen. Capcom is very involved in Street Fighter. That's nearly impossible. So people complaining, why did they release this game without the story mode and some of these other functions? Why didn't they wait till the game had everything? You can wait. You didn't need to purchase it like this. The story mode is coming out in June. You could have purchased the game in June. If they waited to release it in June, it would have the same net effect. You would be getting the game with all the content you want at a later date. Why complain when you could have just simply done that? There is some problems. I think maybe it was a little ridiculous that they released it this early, but they told us most people are okay with this. This is what we wanted. So I'm going to go with that was a pretty good idea. I know a couple other fighting games are doing this more in general, but that's not a bad thing because they will follow up on the content. They're not going to abandon the game. That's a lot of people who are discussing this are a little unaware of most fighting games. This isn't Street Fighter V isn't going to be like Melee. It's not going to be abandoned by the developing company. There's a very symbiotic relationship between the developer company and their fighting game, and they will always try to patch it, they always try to update it and stay with it. So people afraid of that have been burned in other areas of the gaming market, but that would be very bizarre for a fighting game to do that. So that is all of my points. Hope you know that while I do have some problems, I do enjoy the game, and the game's pretty good. So if I sound ignorant, please let me know. Tell me in the comments, because I'm not sure how much of this I actually do know. Educate me, please, by all means. I just wanted to voice my opinion on this. That's all I have to say. See you guys later.